listening to the Blue Raider Podcast, presented by Gold's Gym of Tennessee. Your all-access pass to everything Middle Tennessee sports, game recaps, player spotlights, and the latest from the heart of Blue Raider Nation. Now, here's your host, Jay Golden.
Welcome back to the Blue Raider Podcast. Today's final episode previewing the last game of the Blue Raiders season, where they travel out west to Las Cruces and face the Aggies in what could be a pivotal matchup for both of these programs heading into their off seasons. I'm happy to talk about that, some updates on the hardwood as they are in their Feast Week tournaments, and much more. But before we do that, let's thank today's sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Gold's Gym of Tennessee, and the new year is coming, and so are your resolutions. So Gold's Gym of Tennessee is here to help you hit the ground running with brand new month-to-month pricing starting November 1st. And the best part, there's no fees, ever. So pick the plan that fits your crew. You can go gold for one member at $25 bi-weekly, or you and your partner can upgrade to the VIP, which is $35 billed bi-weekly, or you and your family, good enough for 3 members, is just $45 bi-weekly. And here's another perk. All the memberships include access to all 16 Gold's Gym locations. So whether you're lifting, spinning, or training for a brand new you, they've got you covered with all of their locations across the state of Tennessee. So don't wait for January 1st to start your resolution today. Join online or stop by your local Gold's Gym of Tennessee and kick off the new year with no fees and full access to fitness. Gold's Gym of Tennessee. Stronger starts now. Welcome back into the Blue Raider Podcast. I'm excited to be joining you today, this Tuesday morning, to be talking all things Blue Raiders. It's happening, a lot of news over the weekend, and of course, hardwood action going on out in the coast of Florida, destined for the Lady Raiders and the men out in the Cayman Islands. So a lot to talk about today. I, of course, if you notice, not with a guest today. This will be a new style for those that are listening, and I appreciate everyone that has stuck along with us this year. It's been a long season for football, of course, so we all hope for something better, but here we are, and I can't appreciate you, the listener, enough for tuning in to today's episode and following along with us all year long, and I'm excited to be doing this for you through basketball. Both of these programs look really promising, so I expect a really good year with lots of great content I can get for you guys. Of course, more press conference releases. If you guys aren't already following me on social media, at Blue Raider Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter/X, so you don't miss those live streams. And then over on YouTube, at Blue Raider Pod, again, live streams tuned in there. So a lot of great stuff for you guys, and I'm super excited. Also this week, we will be previewing the Blue Hub highlights. Of course, we'll be sponsored by Blue Hub Nutrition, your local nutrition store located right outside the Greenland parking lot, where they'll get you all the good stuff there. But of course, I'll have more of an ad read for them tomorrow, previewing some of their tasty treats they've got going on around Thanksgiving. But today's, we're going to be previewing that Week 14 matchup in Las Cruces against the New Mexico State Aggies. The Aggies themselves getting just their second win in Conference USA, their first being against Sam Houston all the way back into Week 4. But they were on a 5-game losing skid going into this matchup, going into their I-10 rivalry with UTEP. It took a last-minute drive against El Paso, where they went 6 plays over 80 yards and overtook the Miners in a game that they probably didn't deserve to win. But all things considered, they did what it took to win that football game on the shoulders of a new quarterback, Adam DeMonte, someone who I'll be previewing a little bit later. But I can't talk about this matchup enough and how uncanny it is that both of these programs and the situations that they have found themselves in at this point in the year. MTSU, again, going into the Sam Houston game on a 7-game losing streak. A lot of people very unhappy with coaching style, with the coaches in general. Of course, a lot of the frustration after the win this last week against Sam Houston is the quarterback play. We're all extremely excited about who Roman Gagliano is. Obviously, the youthful presence that he brings, the offense seems to have hit another gear, scoring 31 points this week against Sam Houston. But both of these programs are in a really unique situation because they also think that Adam DeMonte should have been their starting quarterback all year long. They are 4-7. They have 3 one-possession losses in Conference USA to Liberty and Kennesaw State, to just name a few of them. But those are games in particular that they really wish that they could have back, because if they feel like if they had better quarterback play, they could potentially be at 6 wins, or at minimum be at 5 wins and be playing MTSU this Saturday for bowl eligibility. But it's a little too late. And that's exactly how a lot of Blue Raider fans feel right now with Roman at quarterback. You'd like to think if Roman was in there against Missouri State, late in that game against Kennesaw State, late in that game against Jacksonville State, you give yourself an opportunity to win those football games, and you're looking better at 4, maybe 5 wins to this point in the year. So frustration, to say the least, on that side of things. That both of these teams' defenses are definitely the better part of the ball. I know that's hard to look at for Blue Raider fans, considering you gave up 56 to FIU and 42 to Western Kentucky in this last weekend. You gave up 17. Really, you gave up 10, but a late garbage time touchdown by Sam Houston. So I still think this defense is strong. It just at times they get put into bad situations because of turnovers. I'm looking at the FIU game in particular, but even WKU just playing up against a really good, strong offense there, because the Hilltoppers have found something with Rodney Tisdale, to say the least. But to get back, real things back in here, Sam Houston, great showing from Roman. You really can't, it really can't be understated what kind of shot in the arm he has given to this offense, going for a 268 passing yards. That's 657 yards in 2 games. Again, that is the third most passing yards in a game this year by a quarterback, and Roman owns 2 of those top 3 games. And then he rushed for another 67 yards and 3 total touchdowns on Saturday. So he's the other thing too is, and it's not necessarily a direct correlation to what Roman is doing, but obviously you have to respect his arm, because for the second straight week, your rushing numbers have increased. The Blue Raiders rushed for a season high 192 rushing yards after last week in Bowling Green setting a season high of 158. So the rushing attack continues to get better. Jaquil Middlebrooks returned this week. He looked great, didn't really miss a beat from his last matchup. And then the other gem in this is Miles Butler, a guy who coming into this season was your leading returning receiver, and really was quiet with the emergence of Najee Cox and Cameron Lacey. It's nice to see Miles Butler return to who he was in the 2024 season. He led the team with 6 receptions this last week, led the team in receiving for the second straight week. So that's obviously great news. Again, I hate to be a negative talking about all these positives, but it feels a little too late, all things considered. But at this time of the year, you are seeing some new guys. Landon Collins, the walk-on from Farragut High School, had himself a really good game on Saturday, 4 receptions for 37 yards, getting his first start as a Blue Raider. Some other young notable names, Chris Noble at free safety. Of course, he did get disqualified with a helmet-to-helmet targeting call there in the first quarter in that first opening drive. And then Kamari Hall also getting a lot of snaps in the secondary, someone that Coach Mason was very complimentary of in the post-game presser. So getting a lot of these younger guys in rotation is good. Obviously, you want to see that younger development this late in the year. Obviously, you want to keep these guys around when the transfer portal window opens up here in a couple weeks. Playing time is evident to these ball players, and so seeing what you have as far as depth pieces is good, and seeing that these guys are performing is also really important. So just there's a few of my notes that I have for the Sam Houston game, but let's go ahead and turn our attention out into Las Cruces. Already talked about this uncanny similarities with what is happening on the field, and really even the coaching side of things, because Tony Sanchez going into his 4th year, into his 4th year in Las Cruces. A lot of people really aren't happy with who Tony Sanchez is as a coach. Obviously had a failed experiment at UNLV. I think a lot of people were scratching their head when Jerry Kill retired unexpectedly with Diego Pavia, who ultimately ended up going to Vanderbilt, as we all know how that story goes. But New Mexico State really hasn't picked up where Jerry Kill left this program off at. As I said, going into the I-10 rivalry this last week, they themselves were on a 5-game skid, and it took a last drive comeback against El Paso to beat the Miners there on the road. but they're back home for their final matchup at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. That's 2 p.m. Central for us here at home. That game will be viewable on ESPN Plus, with the line opening at 4.5 and the over/under at 53.5. So once again, another low-scoring affair Vegas is predicting in this one, although the home team is going to get the edge, as I would expect. The Blue Raiders have been underdogs all season long on the road. But where I think this matchup is very pivotal for the offseason, and I already touched on a little bit with some of these younger players, the Aggies starting Adam DeMonte. I would believe we're going to be starting Adam DeMonte. I know that Coach Sanchez is playing a little bit of a chess game about who they're going to start at quarterback, because Logan Fife is healthy, the starter that they've had all year long, but he's been battling some injury. He is a top 4 passer in Conference USA, but he has a little bit of the turnover bug. 6 touchdowns on the season, but 7 interceptions to go along with it. The team as a whole on the offensive side does have their issues with holding on to the football, but one of the worst scoring offenses in Conference USA, slightly better than Sam Houston and not nearly as good as the Blue Raiders, averaging just over 21 points per game. And a lot of that has to do with the quarterback play. And that's why Adam DeMonte is someone that Aggie fans are really excited about, because as a sophomore in his 2 starts, he has 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. So certainly they have a future there. And he gives them a different dynamic. He has arm talent. He has the ability to use his legs. Again, sounds oddly familiar to Roman Gagliano and what we're dealing with here in Murfreesboro. But outside of that, the Aggies have a 600-yard receiver in Donovan Fopple. He's led the team in 2 straight weeks in receiving, has led the Aggies in receiving in 5 games this year. He is a top 6 wide receiver in Conference USA. And something the Aggies had last year with guys like Seth McGowan, the Oklahoma transfer, deep running back room. They're all healthy. I'm not concerned about stopping the rush here in Las Cruces, because that's something that this defense has continuously done, regardless of who it was. If it was Cam Cook, this defense always seems to rise to that occasion. But I am concerned about how dynamic DeMonte is, because he's really going to push this Blue Raiders secondary. And it's going to be interesting to see how MTSU prepares for it. Now, they're no stranger to preparing for a backup quarterback, although I use that in air quotes, because he's not necessarily a backup quarterback anymore. He had his first start last week. You have game film on Adam DeMonte, so I would anticipate preparing for him. Now, he is a different athlete than Logan Fife, a bigger guy, if you will. But he has the arm talent, can make all the throws. So the secondary, at times, they have struggled, certainly. So it will be a storyline to follow. Who is Adam DeMonte against a better defense? Because El Paso is not known for their defense. And same could be said for Roman Gagliano this week. I guess the chip on his shoulder is that you got to play Western Kentucky, where they didn't necessarily know that he would be the starting quarterback until the middle of that week. And then Sam Houston, who is one of the worst, if not the worst defense in Conference USA and the country. And you were able to have your way with them for 3/4 of that game. So now that you're going to go face a competent defense and your 3rd start as quarterback of MTSU, how does a defense prepare for Roman Gagliano? This front line for New Mexico State is very good. They have a very good defensive tackle, interior defensive lineman, and Ezra. So the guy's got 6 sacks this year, 10.5 tackles for loss. So it's going to be interesting to see how Roman is able to deal with that pressure. He hasn't had any turnovers thus far, which is certainly promising. My big fear is not if, but when those turnovers come, how does a young guy like that bounce back? And I love the mental headspace that Roman is in. If you listen to us in our post-game press conference live stream, super positive. The kid is just grateful to be playing football. Winning is great, and I think he understands that everything is a blessing to be in the situation that he's in. He's super grateful for who Nick is and the leader that Nick has been for him off the field as well as on the sidelines for him. The type of leadership that he's faced with Derek Mason and Bodie Reeder, I think he's a great kid, and he's going to be a heck of a story to root for going into this offseason. And fingers crossed that he's going to be returning in the blue and white next year, because I love what Roman Gagliano brings to the table. He's just an exciting kid to pull for. But back to this New Mexico State game, it'll be interesting to see what a full week of preparation against Roman Gagliano will bring for the Blue Raiders and how Bodie Reeder plans for that. The rushing attack looked great, using that rushing attack to open up the play action, which at times this weekend the reads were off. Roman is handing it off to nobody. I don't know. I don't know enough about the X's and O's to know whose fault that is, but many times Roman's taking a snap and trying to get a play action handoff fake, and there's no one there to fake the handoff to. So it almost eliminates the whole basis of having the play action. But I would like to think maybe that's a young man's game, just trying to figure it out a little bit. So try to get into Mason's insight a little bit in the post-game presser. Is the playbook, for lack of a better word, dumbed down? Is it gotten simplified for the young quarterback, or is he just performing at a level that we haven't seen thus far with Nick Vattiato? And not necessarily getting a straightforward answer. I think Bodie Reeder is still running the same offense that he wants to run with Nick or with Roman at quarterback. I just think Roman's on time. Roman's hitting these receivers in perfect zone coverage. There's so many highlights from the Sam Houston game that don't necessarily make the ESPN reel, but he's hitting guys in triple coverage, quadruple coverage in these middle of these zones and putting them on a rope. It really is, I want to say, head scratching why Roman didn't get the opportunity sooner, because I'd like to think that he could be the difference in that Missouri State game, the Delaware game, the Jack State game, a one last drive, an on-time throw. I'd like to think that Roman could potentially have been that difference maker. So to get you back to the wrapping up this New Mexico State game, you're 4.5-point dogs on the road. Ironic enough, your only other win this year was on the road, all the way out in Nevada. Las Cruces, you're out in that time zone once again. I would love to think the Blue Raiders are riding some level of momentum, even though you lose by 16 to Western Kentucky. You really run away from Sam Houston. You feel like things are in the upward trajectory for this offense, but I find it hard to win on the road in period, let alone a New Mexico State team who also is riding a high of snapping their own losing streak against El Paso. So I think that there's a level of this game means a lot to both of these programs, because everyone wants to win their last game. Everyone wants to ride that high going into the offseason. Everyone wants to know what it feels like to win, because it's something that's going to sit on you for at least the next couple of months, and something that you can look at for if you either one of these programs. If you're MTSU, you can say, well, we turned it around and won the last two games. Look at where we're going. Same with New Mexico State. We won the last two games. We were able to get to 5 wins. We're just one short of going to a bowl game, and we lost 3 games in conference by 1 possession. So there's really is a lot on the line for these two programs, all things considered. Nothing else past this game, but certainly you want to show some promise moving on. And 5 wins would also be the most wins for Tony Sanchez since he's been in Las Cruces. So another milestone that he needs to reach. And for MTSU's sake, 3 wins will get you back to where you were last year. It's been a disappointment, but to say that you were able to scrounge together and get 2 wins at the end of the year is to some level positive. But I keep beating around the bush. I like New Mexico State in this one. It's on the road. New Mexico State has shown to be the better defense. They've kept them in a lot of ball games. I think this will be Roman's first real test of a defense that is preparing for Roman. I hope that I'm wrong, and I would love for this Roman Gagliano experience to continue and really build up a hype train going into 2026. But I just see New Mexico State being at home on their senior day, trying to get to 5 wins. I like New Mexico State. My final score for this week is going to be 28-24 for the Aggies. Before we get into hardwoods, let's talk about the news that came out yesterday afternoon. Derek Mason will be returning for his 3rd season in 2026. I know that's something that a lot of fans have a lot of opinions on. And, for those that care to listen to it, I'm happy to give my 2 cents on the issue. With Derek Mason, I think one of the biggest things that a lot of us are upset about, rightfully so, is you come off a year where you're 3-9. You're sold that the roster has improved, and this year you didn't live up to those expectations of going to a bowl game and competing for conference championships. And I think hearing the words that he had to say today on it, knowing that he's going to be returning for 2026, he's hoping that they will compete for conference championships next year. My only problem is that's a tall task. You see teams in this conference like Jerry Mack at Kennesaw, who is able to get them competing for a conference championship. They have to win one more game to make sure that they do that. Jacksonville State didn't skip a beat with their coaching change. They also are competing for a conference championship this weekend at Western Kentucky. Missouri State, first year and one of the youngest coaches in college football right now, has them to 7 wins. Nearly had an upset over Kennesaw State this last weekend. Delaware in the same boat there. They are also nearing bowl eligibility, even though they won't be able to go to a bowl game this year. So there's a lot that you feel like the conference has flown past you in what is Derek Mason's second year. So how does he approach 2026? Well, at the end of the day, he's still going to be the coach of the Blue Raiders, whether I like it, whether you like it, because our opinions don't matter to those that make that decision. So where do we look from here? Well, at the end of the day, he's still your coach. The biggest obstacle right now is, can you field a roster that is talented, and will you make the necessary changes to the coaching staff to make this team competitive? Because I think we all agree that this roster is talented, and we learned that now that we have Roman Gagliano at quarterback. I think a lot of us are super excited about who Roman is and what he brings to this table. The offense looks great with him at the quarterback position. I'm not smart enough to tell you that the offense is better because Roman is quarterback, but that is a common denominator here. You have the same offensive coordinator with Nick and with Roman, but with Roman, the offense puts up their best numbers of the season. It's kind of hard to argue that you had a discrepancy at quarterback with Roman now. So now the big obstacle is, does Roman stay? I think he does, knowing now that he has a starting spot in a Conference USA in a Division I football school, because that was always the conversation when Mason got here, was if Nick was going to stay, because Nick, in the same boat, had offers to go other places and decided to stay at MTSU because he knew he had a starting job. And that's exactly the boat that a redshirt sophomore Roman Gagliano will have next year. He will be the starting quarterback at MTSU if he decides to stay, because the only quarterback that you have currently on roster is Stanley Anderson-Lofton. And then you have Rocco Williams, who is a high school signee coming in who won't play next year, I would assume. So you have to imagine that as far as who's on campus, Roman is the guy, unless Mason finds someone in the portal. I don't know that I would be ecstatic if you wasted dollars on that. I think Roman looks the part, is the athlete you want. He's a great kid. You're going to love this story as time goes on. So I like to think that Roman is the guy, because I was under the impression he wasn't ready, but boy, does he look ready. And that certainly, if we can win Saturday, will build up a lot of excitement for who Roman can be in 2026 for Derek Mason. But what do you do outside of that? The offensive line looks good. Dealing with a lot of injuries, though. You're going to have to shore up someone there in the portal. Your weapons on the outside edge. Can you keep Najee Cox? Can you keep Cam Lacey? Can you keep Jaquel Middlebrooks, who's someone who I thought was a long gone all year long? He fought some late injuries. Can you continue to develop DJ Taylor? Can you get someone at tight end like Hunter Tipton? Is there another threat at Hunter like Hunter Tipton that you can bring in to run that more flex tight end H-back position that we've seen in the past with Bodie Reeder when he runs 12 personnel? So those are things I'm looking for on the offensive side. The defensive side, they have to get better in the defensive backfield. I'm not excited about who they have in the secondary. I think that group as a whole has tremendously underperformed. Diari McDonald has looked great. Abdul Muhammad has looked great at times. Past that, the secondary play hasn't been consistent. I know I touched on Chris Noble and Kamari Hall getting some reps this last week. Those are young guys who I hope to see get more reps next year. I want to see them grow into their bodies a little bit more. I'm sure a full offseason is going to do wonders for them preparing for 2026 season, but they're going to have to find some guys in the portal to shore up some depth in the defensive secondary to feel better about that group. You graduate Parker Hughes at linebacker. You still, if you were able to keep guys like Reggie Johnson, if you can keep Muaz Bayard, if you can keep, I would assume Alex Mitchell could be eligible for a red shirt, only playing 4 years in college and only played 4 games this year. So I'm sure if he wants to, he can stay another year. That would be huge for that linebacker group. So how do you shore up the linebacker with the graduation of Parker Hughes? And then, of course, the defensive line. You've got a lot of, that's probably been the strongest unit you've had all year. Can you keep the guys that still have that eligibility left? Can you find guys? Because the concern going into the year was the depth at defensive line. And thankfully, they've stayed healthy. You haven't had to worry about that. But can you be that lucky 2 straight years? I don't know. So that's an area that I would like to see them dive deep into the portal and really get better in the trenches on both sides. So those are the tasks that I think Mason has ahead of him. He's got to keep this roster competitive. He's going to have to do a lot of work in the portal because his high school class is very, very small, which is a little bit contradictory to what he said in the postgame presser on Saturday about the younger core that's coming in, because he had a big recruiting day this last Saturday. We haven't had any commitments from that visit from those OVs that came this last Saturday. So unless he has more up his sleeve that hasn't been made public, it's a relatively small signing class. But I don't have any issue with him doing more portal. I know I've previewed up this season that maybe he shouldn't rely so heavily on the portal. But if next year's make or break, like it does seem to be, because I know going into this year, I said there's no way that he doesn't finish this season. And it got hairy there. It definitely got hairy. But I thought there's no way he doesn't finish this season. So if next year is truly as make or break as we have let it out to be, he's got to do some work in the portal. He's got to find guys that make immediate impacts. Does the roster get better with X signing? So I'm close eyes on what's happening in the portal. I think at this rate, it's really you get who's best available at any position. I don't think that there's any position on this roster that you feel 100% safe in. Assuming no one hits the portal. Roman is probably the one you feel the most comfortable in. You do have guys like Muaz and Alex Mitchell on linebacker, and some of your offensive linemen, Guy Vara, and I think Habanowski's turned out great. Otto, when he gets healthy, looked great as an interior lineman. EJ Harris, another guy who saw some snaps this last week. Your weapons on the outside edge, Cox, Lacey. I think everyone's position is up for grabs this offseason. I'm sure Mason will have comment on that soon. Soon. So I look forward to what he brings to the table this upcoming offseason. But let's move on. We got hardwood happening this week. The Lady Raiders were a winner yesterday in an absolute close battle, rock fight, if you will, against Providence. They trailed 18-2 early in that matchup. Finding a way to win really is super promising. That's a game where you realistically early on you think this is very similar to the Tennessee game. We can't hold on to the ball. We're turning it over. Providence really at that time didn't seem like they could miss a shot, and you couldn't seem to even have possession to get a shot off. And they find a way. I mean, they really do. And it's impressive with how young this team is. Looking forward to the future. We're really going to get another test with this team today. They play at 1:30. In their final game of the Emory Coast Classic against Mississippi State. That's viewable on Flow Sports. If you haven't already got your subscription, it's not the best streaming subscription, but it's the only way you're going to be able to catch them and the men for that matter as they finish up their last day in the Cayman Islands. But for the ladies to bounce back from that 18-2 deficit in the first, to outscore Providence 35-15 over the next two periods, to pull yourself ahead going into the fourth, and then down the stretch, it's a tie ball game with 2 minutes left. You leaned heavily on Elena Contreras to close the door shut, and she certainly did. And you pull out a 6-point victory. Blair Bogus back to her ways after a little bit of a lull in the Tennessee game where they shut her down because of that length that they have at the 5 position. But 17 points, 13 rebounds. I mean, if there was ever a walking double-double, it's Blair Bogus. She is a fighter, and that's kind of the only way I can really put it. She's an absolute warrior down in the paint. Super excited about who she is, and I'm interested to see the amount of Conference USA Freshman of the Week honors that she's able to pull out. And I think the only reason she doesn't win it this week is because of the one game volume, and that is to Tennessee, which obviously wasn't a good game for her. But Elena drops 22 points, 10 of 12 from the free throw line. Only 2 turnovers from the point guard position. She did get a lot of minutes at the point guard, and that's another developing story with these Lady Raiders is Yuhan Lin has really taken a back seat. Kirsten Verholst gets her first start against Providence. She plays 23 minutes with 4 assists and no turnovers. That's something of note. We saw Elena Contreras take point guard minutes, but more interesting enough there late in that second half, we saw Carson Swaney, who also earned a start against Tennessee, came off the bench against Providence, but there late, she got minutes at the point guard position. Her stat line's not going to jump out at you. She played 19 minutes, 0 for 1 shooting, 1 rebound, 1 assist, 1 turnover. But the the consistency that she provides on defense. She did have 4 fouls, but the consistency that she provides on defense is nice. She is a true role player. She does whatever she's told, and she executes, and she knows how important her role is to this team. But as we move into Mississippi State today, I'm looking to see how they continue to shake up that point guard position. I thought they found something with Kirsten, but evidently they're still trying some new things with Elena and Carson, getting some reps at the 1. Even Savannah, who isn't really a point guard, but has ball handling ability. So how do they find themselves through Mississippi State, who is still an SEC opponent? They're not going to be Tennessee. They really are going to be the bottom quarter of the SEC this year. But it's a winnable game on a neutral floor. You're riding a high because your defense played outstanding for the last 3 quarters against Providence. So how do you ride that high? Can you get the offense going for once in the last couple weeks to get yourself a big win against a Mississippi State program? Because you're really going to get a feel for how good this team is against Mississippi State. Again, a team I would kind of put up in that tier with Rice, the road loss that they had last week, someone that is a top 100 net RPI team. Maybe not necessarily an NCAA tournament team, but still a respectable opponent. And how does a young freshman group respond one day later? This is tournament basketball. This is something that's going to be repeated when March rolls around. So how does this team respond to that? I look forward to that. The other side, out in the Cayman Islands, the men got a really, really good win on Sunday night against Murray State, a team who they lost to last year. Now, all things considered, a whole new coaching staff, all new roster. This is not the same Murray State team, but going into it as 7.5-point underdogs, outscoring the Racers 90-87, a game that really you never felt like you were out of it any moment. You led by 3 at halftime. Torrey Alston, what a game. He had 26 points, 16 rebounds. I'm so excited for tomorrow's episode with our Blue Hub highlights to go over everything that Torrey Alston did. But Torrey, high flying, baptizing people at the rim. The guy is much like Blair Bogus is for the women. He is a warrior in the post. If there's not a rebound that he doesn't think he can get to. I thought Loof at times showed really good minutes, only 15, had to deal with some foul trouble, but for him to get 10 points, 4 rebounds, and just 15 minutes of play was promising. Luka played an outstanding 19 minutes off the bench. I think he has really found himself into this role player off the bench minutes that I think originally I didn't think was going to happen. I thought Luka would 1,000% be a redshirt this year, but the closing minutes that he had, a huge putback there in the final minutes that gave the Blue Raiders a 4-point cushion was huge for this team. Other guys off the bench like Alec Oglesby, who went 4 or 5 from 3-point range. Just a lot to be excited about this team winning that game. To be truthful, going into the Cayman Islands, Murray was probably the best chance they had to win a game, and they did. Now going to George Washington, like we saw last night, not necessarily the same case. George Washington by far is the best team in this tournament. And you might say, well, they lost to McNeese in their night 1 matchup, but McNeese also a very good team who is going to be in the NCAA tournament because there's no one in the Southland that can compete with McNeese this year. But McNeese is a totally different team because of who they are with Will Wade leaving. But Murray State, very good team in the Missouri Valley, going to be a top half team in the Missouri Valley, very similar to like what we see with Casey Alexander and Belmont, always going to be a well-coached team with Mike Miller at the helm. So I think Murray State is still trying to find themselves. I think when it's all said and done, that's really going to be a huge win for the Blue Raiders and help out with net, RPI ranking, and all those things, how those all come into late in the season for Conference USA. But on to Monday night's game where they lose to George Washington, who I would have to admit the Blue Raiders were an inferior opponent in there. George Washington coming off a game where they had 24 turnovers to McNeese, certainly keeping an eye on the turnover bug because the Revolutionaries only gave up 9 turnovers. It's a tough matchup to win when you're not able to force turnovers, and that is something I'm concerned about. The defense giving up 87 to Murray, and now 92 to George Washington. But the 23 points off turnovers for George Washington really is the biggest story in this game. The 3-point shooting this week for the Blue Raiders, only attempting 16 against Murray State, now 19 against George Washington. Again, tonight's is the final game of the Cayman Islands where they face McNeese, and that game tips off at 4 o'clock on Flow Sports as well. Torrey Alston was once again your game's leading scorer against George Washington. Other positive minutes, I love Chris Loof. His footwork was great in this matchup, 13 points in 25 minutes. Outside of that, Oglesby continued to stay strong with 4 more three-pointers, so he's up to 8 for the week. He's been that consistent role player, really good defensive minutes too, I thought. But outside of that, you really have no scoring threat this week outside of Alston, Loof, and Oglesby. And that is concerning. Not to say that those 3 are going to be your leading scorers all year long, because Kamari Lands is someone who's been previewed all season as your premier scorer. And against George Washington, he goes 0 for 6 from 3. Now, I think Kamari is a hot shooter when he's hot, and he's a cold shooter when he's cold. And yesterday happened to be a very cold day for him. And so I would expect him to bounce back to some degree, because he also had a cold night against Murray. I think you can't keep Lands down for long, because we all see who he is when he gets hot, much like he did out there in Evansville. So Kamari, I'm certain will bounce back. If that's today, I don't know, but you can't keep a guy like that's as talented as Kamari Lands down for this long. Luka didn't play nearly as many minutes as we saw against Murray, but solid 9 minutes off the bench. Jared also had 7 minutes off the bench, fighting a little bit of foul trouble, which is why Luka, I think, is getting more of those minutes, because he can defend without fouling. But same there, the lineup situation as far as the point guard, they love Carter, they love Smith. Both of those are your premier point guards, but we saw lineups in there when George Washington was pressing where we saw James Dent bring the ball up the floor, but they feel comfortable with anyone with the ball in their hands. This team is very unselfish, as Coach McDevitt has said. You're still assisting on over half of your field goals made. The turnover bug really isn't that bad, considering a team that does like to move the ball as much as they do. Now they have some uncharacteristic turnovers, just really forcing the ball on the fast breaks that end up going, George Washington's got length. They're able to get their hands on those passing lanes that really got you into some trouble in some transition offensive opportunities. And George Washington, made you pay, as I said earlier, with 23 points off of those turnovers. So something that I hope that they defensively can clean up. How do they respond? Much like I said with the ladies, how do they respond on such a short, quick turnaround week this afternoon, I should say, against McNeese State? Again, another quality opponent. I think leaving this tournament at 1-2 is not anything to be upset about. I would like to see them respond a little bit better late. I don't like losing by 20 to George Washington and let that game get away from you. I'd like to see this team battle, and that's where I really look forward to seeing how this team responds to McNeese State on such quick notice. Because this is another good basketball team, another good basketball game. Again, 4 p.m. today, viewable on Flow Sports. If you're not already subscribed to that, it is $30 for the monthly subscription. You can go right in and watch all the holiday hoops that are on there. And if you're like me, you'll just cancel it when this week is over. Just make sure you don't cancel, or they'll charge you $30 again in December. So, well, that about does it for us today on the Blue Raider Podcast. Thanks to you, the viewer, for tuning into today's episode. If you're not already following us, once again, on social media, at Blue Raider Pod, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, X/Twitter. And if you're listening to us on our live stream on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss another one of our uploads. Again, tomorrow, Blue Hub Highlights, a whole new segment I'm bringing for you where we will go over some highlights on the hardwood. We, of course, sponsored by our friends over at Blue Hub Nutrition. Super excited to have them on board and to roll out some new, fresh content for you guys that may not get to see all this action this week because it's streaming over on Flow Hoops. So that's a cool little segment I'm going to be presenting to you guys every Wednesday as we get through the season. But again, follow us on socials if you're not already. I look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow for that Blue Hub Highlights. Until then, go Blue.